Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the House, a joint hearing of the Senate Committee on
Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs.
And the House Committee on General and Housing. And we're here today to hear from the administration its a summary or an introduction to its housing proposal. And we have 2 hours. What we'll do is we'll sort of make it through an hour, take a break, and then continue as needed to noon. And I think the very first thing we should do is introduce ourselves to everybody in the room and those people who are on. So perhaps we should start with you guys in the Senate.
Tom Chittenden, I represent Chittenden Southeast, 11 communities in the southeast area of Chittenden County.
I'm Randy Brock from Swanton. I represent Franklin County and part of Grand Isle.
Good morning, Dave Weeks, representing Rutland County.
I'll tell you what, why don't you start here?
All right. Representative Emily Krasnow, and I am Chittenden 9, South Burlington.
Representative Sylvia Lamont, Lamoille, Washington District.
Representative Mary Howard, Rutland City District 6.
Representative Gail Pezzo, Chittenden 20, Colchester.
No, she's gonna introduce
She
herself.
will get there.
We'll get there, yeah.
I am Tom Charlton. Represent Chester, Athens, Grafton, and Wyndham.
Joe Parsons, represent the beautiful towns of Newberry, Topsom, and Groton.
Oh, I do it that way. I'm
Yeah.
Leonora Tosh. I represent the best parts of Essex Town and the city of Essex Junction.
Oh, man, this is we're gonna go down and dirty. Allison Clarkson, I live in Woodstock. I'm one of the 3 senators for the Windsor District, and I live in the 26th most beautiful town in the United States of America.
I think I'm just gonna say I'm Mark Mahali. I represent 3 towns, Calais, Plainfield, and Marshfield. And this is a little different in that this is not a bill yet with a bill number. It has been, I think, submitted in both the House and the Senate to become a bill. And so we're jumping the gun a little bit, but I thought it was really worthwhile. We both did that. Given all the work that's gone into it, and given that it is in pretty much final form for submittal, that we shouldn't wait, that we should hear from the administration. And I asked the minority leader to come and introduce it to us because I believe she will be a lead author. So you want to introduce yourself and take it away.
For the record, good morning. For the record, Patty McCoy, Representative Patty McCoy. I represent Rutland 1, which are the towns of Pulteney, Ira, and that part of Wells that is west of Route 30, which includes Lake St. Catherine, one of the best lakes in the state, I might add. So, good morning. Vermonters in every corner of the state are struggling with the lack of housing at all income levels. Average home prices have increased over 40% this decade, and there simply isn't enough supply to meet today's demand. Vermonters have been clear. They want Montpelier to focus on affordability. Housing is one of the largest expenses any family has, so it's a great place to focus on as we work to make Vermont more affordable. I'm pleased to be the lead sponsor of Governor Scott's omnibus housing package, which includes critical investments to revitalize homes and communities, support infrastructure that's vital to build new housing, making important regulatory reforms to make it easier, cheaper, and faster to build in the places we want, and more. As Commissioner Farrell will discuss, just to meet current demand, Vermont needs to build over 7,000 new homes per year, a number we're not even close to right now. To reach this goal, we need to be bold, and we've heard bold when we're talking about our education as well. I mean, I think this is the year that, we really need to start thinking in that way. We cannot afford to just nibble around the edges. We all agree we're in a housing crisis, so we have to respond like we're in a crisis. The governor's bill helps build on some progress made last year, while also revisiting policies that are working against our goals to create more housing. By investing tens of millions of dollars, reducing cost, time, and risk of home building with targeted regulatory reforms in zoning, permitting, and appeals to accelerate housing unit creation, we can achieve and maintain a healthy housing market in Vermont. More housing means more jobs, more vibrant communities, and lower property taxes. The time to act is now. And I will turn it over to Commissioner Farrell to.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Representative McCoy. We ordinarily, if this was a bill introduction in the formal sense, we would have Ledge Counsel Cameron Wood give a brief discussion of all 81 pages of the bill or whatever it is now.
You can develop. I'm still working on it again, right?
But in light of the reality of the situation, we're going to ask Commissioner Farrell to come and walk us through the bill directly without comment by Ledge Counsel, although Ledge Counsel is here. If there are any questions. And speaking of questions, I would ask the senators and members of this committee to feel free to ask questions when they come up. Just raise your hand and we'll make sure we recognize you, even in the middle of the, I guess what I'm saying is, Commissioner, you may be interrupted.
That's okay. I think he's used to that.
I am used to that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and good luck to you and do good.
Thank you, Patty.
Thanks,
Thank
Patty.
you. So Commissioner Farrell, you want to state your name for the record, and I think we all have the material that. Do you want to put anything online that is for those who are watching online, or how do you want to handle that?
Yeah, sure.
Tell us your name first. For the record.
Thank you, Chair Mahali. For the record, Alex Farrell, Commissioner at the Department of Housing and Community Development. So my colleague Hazel over here is going to pull up a slide deck. You should all have this slide deck. You're going to note that the slides and the narrative that I'm going to frame up this bill is not in the same order as the bill as drafted. But to make it easy for you to reference the bill as I'm walking through this, I have put page and line numbers to specific sections so you can find it in the bill as we go. All right.
Where's that?
As you look through the PowerPoint, you'll see there yellow highlighted page numbers. And then yes, you should
These are
a copy of the bill itself.
I don't. I love
Here,
a
you
copy
can
of the
have
bill
mine.
itself.
These are references to, the page
I thought
numbers
we
are
was in
references to what is called draft 6.1.
That's right. That's right.
Okay,
That's right. The draft that I handed out, these will sync up with those page references. All right. So good morning, everybody. Thank you. You'll note that we've branded this bill. We've got a fun name, Path for Vermont, Pathway to Accelerate and Transform Housing for Vermont. For future reference, we also gave you a one-pager, which is a broader summary and something that you can reference as you want to recall the broad strokes of the bill.
excuse me, just.
No, that's all right.
Apologies.
Yeah.
I was trying to be discreet. We're good.
No, that's okay.
Didn't work.
Okay.
All right, please. All right. So I'm going to very briefly state the problem, and then I'm going to basically launch right into the bill. I hope that's okay. So the problem that the way we framed it up is a shortage of housing units, which is sort of plainly understood, as well as a housing stock that does not fit the current needs, and neglected communities throughout Vermont, particularly in rural communities. Brief recap of what we've done over the past several years. We all know about the significant investment that we were able to make thanks to an influx of federal funding. So roughly $600 million was able to go towards unit creation. That is not including rent arrears. That is not including mortgage support. This is funding that went towards unit creation over the past several years, FY 21 to 25, according to Department of Finance and Management. We leaned into tools that reinvigorated some of these communities that we're worried about. This is brownfields, healthy homes, and of course TIF. And then I'm going to touch on in these next two slides some of the land use and zoning reform. So the first one I'm going to talk about, a lot of us are very familiar with, the Home Act. The reason I framed this up is this was largely focused on our municipalities and steering their zoning in a way that would allow for more density and putting guardrails that they had to enable more density. The next slide is going to talk a bit about Act 181 from last year, which really turned towards state permitting and tried to align some of those same goals with our state permitting systems and remove some duplication. And this is where we carved out certain exemptions, both in the interim and in the long term under the new tiered system. Yes.
Alex, if you'd be kind enough to go back to the Home Act, we had
Certainly.
a discussion of by right. And for the new members of both committees, perhaps it would be useful for you to explain the tool that we enabled in our change in our by right laws in our downtowns and village centers.
Sure. So generally speaking, by right usually refers to a system where there's no public hearing. If it fits within a certain construct, in this case, we've enabled up to 4-unit buildings in certain areas where there's water and wastewater. You get that permit. So that's known as by right. Duplexing by right is another thing that was substantial that was achieved in the Home Act, which essentially anywhere that there's residential zoning where you're allowed to have single family homes, you are also allowed now in the state of Vermont to have a duplex, as long as it fits the same dimensional standards. So
For those who know or don't, by right, it's RIT.
yes.
And it's, think of a single family house in a single family zone. You go in and you get a building permit. There isn't a discretionary hearing where they could, the local body could say, no, actually, you can't have your home there. And in the Home Act, by right, this kind of zoning, which is all, you essentially get a building permit, is expanded to duplexes
And
fourplexes,
That's right, where there's water and wastewater.
multiplexes, as long as we have water and sewer
as long as there's water. So
and the density. And
That's right.
yeah, and the multi-unit. So we were discussing this in downstairs before, and I just want to, for new members, have them appreciate, because they hear the term by right and that somehow that's a restriction. It's now pretty much, greenlit in certain areas.
Yeah, I think a valuable way to frame it up is it was sort of a rebalancing to more leaning towards property rights, really, and eliminating a little bit of the discretion of municipalities.
And eliminating sort of character. You couldn't discriminate on character to neighborhood.
Exactly. That's right.
That helped.
All right.
Sorry, back to 181.
No, thank you. All right, so to touch on 181 again, this is last year's Act 250 reform, which generated the 3-tier structure. Tiers 1A and 1B, 1A being the highest level of exempted area where there's essentially if municipality reaches certain criteria and they've mapped an area that fits in sort of the future land use, the growth goals, that area is fully exempt from state permitting in Act 250, but is still subject to other state permitting such as wetlands and other permits. But it is exempt from Act 250. 1B is sort of the second level of tier and where it's a slightly lower threshold to obtain these exemptions. But if you are able to carve out a tier 1B area in your town, think of a smaller town that might have a robust village center with water and wastewater, as well as zoning and bylaws. If you live in one of those areas as constructed right now, you could potentially obtain a tier 1B area and you're able to build without an Act 250 permit up to 50 units of housing. And then tier 2 is essentially sort of a status quo tier with the exception that there's now added a road rule. Road rule means that there's now an Act 250 trigger based on the length of driveways or a network of driveways and roads. If it's a network, it's 2,000 feet of those roads or driveways will trigger Act 250. If it's a single driveway, 800 feet will automatically trigger Act 250. And then there's a tier 3 that's proposed that still has to go through rulemaking that would be intended to increase Act 250 jurisdiction to protect our critical natural resource areas. All right, so now I'm going to move into how we frame up the bill, and then we're going to launch right into it. I'm not going to read.
Sorry, can I just add, that one of the most important things about this mapping work that is expected to be done, Charlie Baker insists that it's to be done by December of 26. For new members, one of the things that I appreciate the most about our mapping work and the integrity of the mapping work is that it is really ground up. It wasn't top down, which we know how much Vermont loves top down. So it really begins with our municipal investment in where they want to grow and their work with their regional planning commissions, confirming that. In some cases, it's confirming a town plan, and in some cases, it's reworking some of the town plan to look where they want to grow, what areas they want to preserve, and so forth. And I love the fact that it is a ground up, really essentially at its best, a ground up mapping process that everyone will hopefully have bought into, and we will therefore have less turf battles, as it were, over what we greenlight and don't greenlight. So I think that's,
Yeah.
Would you agree, Commissioner? I mean, I think at its best, that's what this is.
I very much agree, and what the future land use mapping effort will do is align all of our local, regional, and state land use planning, so that now we're targeting growth where we want it, and we're preserving where we want to conserve.
Commissioner, just one quick question. In terms of the status quo now.
Hmm.
So if there's a village center, say, or a growth area that is mapped right now, someone could come in and build up to the number of units that's the maximum, 50 or unlimited, depending
Under the interim
under the
exemptions.
interim exemption. The mapping that's going on is intended to refine these areas, but before that refinement occurs, if I were a developer and I went in and wanted to develop, I could now on the basis of the interim exemption.
That's right. And that's a good reminder for folks or a refresher for folks who are new. Yes, you can. As sort of an on-ramp, you could say we implemented interim exemptions to make sure that we could get to the building pace that we want before these tier 1A and 1B areas go into effect, because the application for those areas will start in 2026. So the goal of these interim exemptions was to achieve that now, but without knowing exactly what those tier 1A and 1B areas will look like, because the future land use mapping process is still underway. We used as a proxy our designated areas. Now, our designated areas were never really intended to be sort of a planning proxy in that way, but they have turned into that, and so that was the best way to jumpstart these exemptions under interim exemptions. Those are currently set to sunset at the start of 2026. All right. So our goals with the Path for VT plan. I'm not going to read these to you. You've got the handout, but I just want to highlight that we're not just thinking about housing units. We're also thinking about revitalizing communities throughout the state. We're thinking about resiliency, as we know we're seeing more frequent disasters. We're thinking about the pipeline. Who's building these? How can we broaden the base of who is building these homes? Who's participating in development? What are the incentives so that we can bring in public money to match private money to match the public dollars that we invest? So that's going to take me to the 4 prongs of our strategy that framed up the bill. And you'll see these themes as I go through the bill and as I walk through the slides, but this is how we were thinking about things. So the first First thing that we see as a necessity is strengthening our foundation. And by that, we mean looking to our infrastructure. We're placing a lot of importance on our water and wastewater, and we're asking a lot of our state in terms of growth. If we're going to enable that, we need to focus on broadening our water and wastewater systems and our transportation and transit systems. So that's an area where we know we need to increase our funding and our financing tools. We want to revitalize neglected communities, and by that, we mean turning to rural Vermont and make sure that the county economic centers and the small villages are not left behind in this. And so we need to make sure that some of these incentives target rural Vermont. We wanted to expand and accelerate home building. So this is not just the investments, that's certainly part of it. But beyond that, we also want to start broadening the base of who can participate in this home building and participate in development. And then, of course, the area that we hear a lot about that'll touch more on the areas of the Home Act and Act 181, which is breaking down procedural barriers. So this is thinking about land use, permitting, and appeals. All right, any questions before I launch in? Okay. All right, so I'm going to start with infrastructure. As some of you may have heard in the governor's budget, we're proposing $9.1 million to establish a new revolving loan fund in partnership with the Vermont Bond Bank to be named the Vermont Infrastructure Sustainability Fund. The purpose of this fund would be to provide funding, basically low-cost financing to municipalities. This can be to expand infrastructure such as water or wastewater systems that are going to directly serve housing development. It could also be used for transportation infrastructure that's required as a part of certain local or statewide planning requirements. And you can see at the bottom of the page here, this is the first instance where you're going to have yellow highlighted where it'll reference
That's helpful.
the bill. All right, good, thanks. Now Cameron and his team may reorder this as well.
It's a huge team.
Yes. Now, you can see some eligible activities would be the engineering and planning, as well as the construction of this infrastructure. And Michael Gahn from the Bond Bank, I am sure would be happy to come in and talk in more depth about his plan for designing that program in collaboration with the Department of Housing and Community Development.
His question is, you said this financing is available for a municipality.
Right.
It's not to be used by the state, transit agencies, et cetera. It's municipality.
That's right.
So for municipalities who currently have water and sewer, but are in the process of upgrading them to accommodate growth, they would also be eligible, not just new systems. Just want to clarify that.
They would. So there are certainly instances, Barry or even parts
Or
of
Woodstock.
Woodstock, right?
We had a private company that didn't continue to
That's
invest.
right.
And as a result, we have hit a limit of, even within the village limits, we can't
Yeah, absolutely.
have any new hookups.
And so in a case like that, where there's sort of, you can demonstrate a direct connection to housing development and progress towards your housing goals, your housing targets, that would become eligible. Now, this is $9.1 million. That's not going to meet the full state. This is opening the door, establishing a new fund, something that can be invested in the future and continue to grow. But this is part of the puzzle for infrastructure. I want to,
Go ahead,
I
Lisa.
just have a very basic question. I mean, if like GMT urban is already facing like anywhere, depending on what you look at, a $1 to $3 million loss, this feels like a very minimal investment in infrastructure. If that's just one aspect, it's like transportation in one area of the state.
Sure.
So it feels very minimal. Help me understand how this is actually significant.
I don't think it
investment in
even addresses
infrastructure.
that because it's only for municipalities.
that's right.
So it's not even for,
And
it's not for GMT.
But to her point, just a little of Woodstock, the upgrade is like over $20 million. So this might help match and leverage other grant opportunities. State money can be used by municipalities in sort of amplifying ways.
Mhm.
And I think that's probably your hope, but you're right, it's not enough for 252 municipalities.
No, that's right. I think we recognize that we had to prioritize budget wise this year. And so this is going to be one piece of the pie for infrastructure, but it's certainly not the only part of our infrastructure proposal. And I think it is just a starting point. And the goal for this would be ideally more project specific. Generally speaking, the criteria is intended to prioritize investments where there's a project near ready.
Sorry, go ahead, please.
Who prioritized?
So we'll, between the bond bank and DHCD, we'll design a program that lays out certain criteria and essentially prioritization.
So a municipality will apply to DHCD
Or to the bond
or
bank.
to the bond bank.
I think probably to the bond bank, which already has that ability to.
They will be administering the program. We will just participate in program design as part of the grant agreement.
Let me interrupt for just one moment. For some members of our committee, in many states, municipalities, if they have a big capital project and they can't pay for it as you go, they will issue bonds themselves. They're municipal bonds, they're tax exempt. Bondholder, the bonds are issued, they get the money, and then they pay off the bonds. In Vermont, our towns are so small that we've invented a device which actually a few states have, and I think not that many, which is we have a statewide bond bank. And with the limited exceptions, when a small town has a project where they need $900,000, $800,000 or something like that, they will go through the bond bank, and the bond bank will issue the bonds and then provide the money to the municipality. So that's what the bond bank is. Sorry to interrupt.
No, thank you. That's helpful.
We love the bond bank.
And this is intended to complement other existing sources. You'll note that in the bill, there's also a proposal to broaden the applicability of the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. Right now, that's constrained geographically. I don't know, Neil, Deputy Commissioner Kamen is welcome to correct me, but there's a proposal to sort of broaden the applicability of that where it's currently constrained right now. Is that in broad strokes fair?
That is fair. Good morning. For the record, Neil Cameron, Deputy Commissioner, Department of Environmental Conservation. Good morning. Thank you, Alex. Just very briefly to let the committees understand that in addition to this fund that Commissioner Farrell was talking about, the state manages the state revolving loan funds. We have one for drinking water. We have one for clean water. So think stormwater and wastewater needs. Those are large infrastructure revolving loan funds that provide subsidy for municipal borrowers and certain private borrowers. No subsidy available for private borrowers, but very advantageous terms. This fund is designed to complement the state revolving loan fund by alleviating some of the federal limitations. Senator, you mentioned Woodstock, so there's an example of what had been a federal limitation prior to the municipality taking up that system. So there are certain things the SRFs cannot do that this fund will allow us to work with ACCD to accomplish.
Thank you, Neil.
But Neil, what you're saying is the revolving loan fund is subject to federal limitations, but the $9.1 million fund would not be.
Precisely. So if I could paint a very quick picture, imagine you had a municipality that envisions a public-private partnership with a housing development out there just beyond the service area. So getting those pipes out there, drinking water and wastewater, it's very expensive. And the private developer can't necessarily afford that. But the municipality itself, if they go to bond, we may not be able to provide SRF dollars for that because it doesn't meet the federal guidelines for the uses of the fund. So this is a perfect example where they work together.
And the federal guidelines apply because the state revolving loan fund has federal dollars in it.
That's correct.
Nothing worse than federal. Yes.
Well, we may have done.
You know,
We may have an issue. In which case, that number will be diminished.
Yes, all right. So please proceed. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, those are good interruptions. Thank you.
No, but just a reminder of how dependent we are actually on our federal partners.
Very.
Oh, yes.
So maybe I'll transition now to talk about another infrastructure tool that's proposed. in this bill. To do so, Chair Mahali, if it's okay, I'm going to pass it to Commissioner Joan Goldstein, who's on the screen here, to talk about Spark.
You want
Excellent.
to actually appear, or shall we keep up this?
These slides are good for Joan to work on.
Okay. Welcome,
Joan.
welcome Commissioner Goldstein.
Hello, thank you very much. And for the record, Joan Goldstein, Commissioner of Economic Development. Yes, to add on to the infrastructure capability, Spark is really another form of TIF. Think of it as a simplified version. TIF is tax incremental financing districts. They currently exist in the state, but they are currently utilized mainly by large towns. And we want to extend this program to the smaller towns to take advantage of. In order to do that, we want to, instead of it being multiple parcels and multiple projects, perhaps there's a mixed-use housing development in a small town. And we want to make this available to them. So it would be based on a project-specific infrastructure investment to spur the builder to basically build in that town. The municipality has the choice of either keeping the increment from the collected new taxes that they're going to get from the private development, keep it and do the debt service on the infrastructure project, or more importantly, the municipality has the option of allowing a percentage of the incremental property tax revenue to go back to that home builder or investment partner for a specific project for a defined period of time. So this would really open up that opportunity to take that increment and help the builder with their gaps, because we've been hearing from builders, not just on housing, but also other projects, that the cost of construction has increased considerably. So we're hoping that this could help with that gap.
So this is really a reimagining of our project-based TIF project.
Correct. It's project-based TIF plus,
Yeah.
I would say, to acknowledge the current housing crisis and we need more incentives to incentivize building.
Joan, two questions. I read the Spark sections and confess to still being slightly puzzled. First, the bonds can the money from a Spark district, is it used only for what is deemed to be a public project, that is infrastructure, roads, etc., or can it go to a developer and be used for what we think of as private project costs?
Yeah, the way we've envisioned this is that it would be either or. So,
Okay.
And it's really municipally driven. So whatever builder comes from municipality, it's going to be up to those two parties to agree upon, what is going to happen to the increment. Obviously, if the municipality needs infrastructure, they may take that. We can't do both. This all has to pencil out and be financially viable. Sorry, did I interrupt you?
So that means if bonds are involved, if it's private, they'd be taxable.
Correct. If it's private, it would probably be they were either getting bank financing or, however they're doing their financing. And we would envision this to be more of a rebate. In other words, there's no upfront money to the builder. It would be the building has to happen, the increment has to be realized, and it really acts almost like a rebate so that we're assured that this has happened, there is increment. But at least for the builder, they have that agreement with the municipality that they could count on that increment coming back to them.
But the municipality could elect to not pay as you go, but bond.
Yeah.
Yes, it could.
Okay. The other question I have is, I was confused about the education fund. My understanding vaguely is somehow the ed fund can be held harmless, but I don't understand how. Am I just misguided? What happens with the increment that would have been used to go into the ed fund?
So we're envisioning to work the same way we do with TIF, which is that basically the municipality retains a percentage of the ed fund, of the education tax and the municipal tax, and they use that to repay debt. And it would work the same way. We're envisioning it to work the same way. So we think of it as really an investment in the future. This is for next generation. And when we look at the TIF districts we have had and we compare the original taxable value to the current taxable value, the increases are significant. So in total, we end up contributing more to the ed fund than we would have if these developments do not happen.
Thank you.
The next slide. Yeah, this is just the kind of, the reason and the rationale for doing this is to get more housing in rural areas and creating new and rehabilitating units. This could also be used in flood impacted communities. There are some municipalities that may not want to do buyouts or may not have the funding to do it on their own. And so we would want this to count as public infrastructure to repair or to mitigate those homes. Economic growth in areas that have historically been challenged by limited municipal capacity. In some cases, the municipality may pass the benefit to the builder, and then the builder also has to deal with the admin and the accounting of it. So we think this could help the housing crisis as well as really spur economic development. Without housing, we don't have economic development. And then that infographic on the bottom kind of explains how the increment works. Vermont Economic Progress Council, which is the body that actually, will determine whether or not these projects as proposed financially pencil out, that there would be enough increment, for example. And the new property tax revenue gets collected and there's a rebate that goes back to the investment partner. Sorry, go ahead. In order to do this, in order to bring about Spark, we would really need to lift there's a current cap on TIF in the state. We have a limit, a statewide limit. We also have a limit per county and a limit on per municipality. And we really don't think that this constraint is helping us. We really do think that TIF could be utilized as a great tool without utilizing, needing necessarily an appropriation. It gives a lot of flexibility to the municipality. We do hear of builders having to foot the bill of some of the infrastructure projects. So I think that this, in order for this to go through, we do need some amendments to the current TIF statute. Then there's an administrative one, which is about the timeline of a district to begin. So that is all included in this housing bill.
Yeah, we have a question from Thomas.
Commissioner Goldstein, I wonder if I might ask a question I've asked in the past to see if this new Spark version of project-based TIF comes at a different angle. The biggest concern I have with this comes from my experience on the South Burlington City Council, managing a very successful TIF, and the administrative overhead that's required to just stay true to all of the mandates and conformance with BEPC. My concern is to enable this for the smaller communities. I always hold up my good friends in Westford. I want them to have a project-based TIF, but they have very little, if any, administrative staff to oversee the type of detail. Could you elaborate on how you would see the administrative burdens falling on these project-based TIFs? Who would be responsible for doing the check-in, the follow-up, and the follow-through work for the smaller communities without administration?
Well, I think VEPC, a lot falls on VEPC. I know that they do monitoring, and maybe, Jessica, if you're online, if you could just talk a little bit about the monitoring that you do on the existing TIFs, but also bear in mind that these are the current TIFs, like South Burlington, these are massive amounts of projects and massive timelines. And what we're envisioning with this would be 1 or 2 projects. So it does minimize some of that admin. But Jessica, if you want to elaborate.
Yeah, sure. So for the record, I'm Jessica Hartleben, and I'm the executive director of the Vermont Economic Progress Council. And in the current TIF structure, we do have twice a year monitoring that we go out and review with the towns, their projects. I would agree with Senator Chittenden that the monitoring can be administratively burdensome, but I think that for these projects, as Commissioner Goldstein has said, the number of projects will be significantly less. So the timeline to do the monitoring will also be significantly less. We anticipate that these projects will probably have a 10 to 15 year runway as opposed to a 25 or 30-year runway. And the other piece of this that is unique is that the municipality and the builders will be entering into community agreements. And so it's hoped that the municipalities can work with their community builder partners to help with any administrative costs that will need to happen as a result of these smaller project-based TIFs. It's really the hope that these smaller rural areas and small towns can attract builders to come and work with the municipalities to spark, for lack of a better term, housing and economic development.
Joe, you had a question?
Yeah, I guess I was just gonna, along that same vein, I guess, of understanding how, and I guess this comes in a lot of forms in this building of when we say rural, just what that really means to be rural.
Whole state.
The whole state.
No, it is that, the whole state is not. The burden of a project like this on a small town. The scale of the projects that would be done using something like, because I see some of what it means to be a Spark project as excellent, looks excellent. There's no way I'm going through the next 9 pages of what I have to do for a $70,000 project that our town could use here, maybe a few years later over here. So yeah, I guess it's just from my lens, a misunderstanding of what small towns really need.
Maybe it would be helpful if you said to us, if you could, what do you think the range of size of projects that would be likely to be involved in Spark as opposed to the larger projects in TIFs now?
Well, I think the larger TIF projects now are, tens of millions of dollars. And just before I was the executive director of VEPSI, I worked with Commissioner Goldstein in the CRRP realm, and there was a municipal component to that. And those projects tended to be between $500,000 and $1 million. So it's really dependent on what the municipality needs. And so part of the flexibility in this is having the municipality work with the community builders and then coming up with the proposal that works. And this has been used in the state of Maine. And I would be happy to come back and testify at additional time and talk to you about that and what the state of Maine has done and how they've used these community agreements to be successful in working in their rural communities.
Thank you, that will happen. Senator.
Just as a closing comment, what I would hope to see with that Maine maybe utilized, and I'd love to just have that be part of this conversation, is an overseeing organization that already has relevant jurisdiction, like our planning commissions, our regional planning commissions. I would feel I want this to happen, but I think to make it actually procedurally feasible, I would love to see the CCRPCs, the regional planning commissions, having those administrative overheads to help all of our very small towns walk through these processes and share that burden. So that would be useful for me to hear from that stakeholder group on this topic.
Yeah. Thomas, I think that's great. And also, Jessica, it would be helpful to give us some examples. Like, I can think of towns in the Windsor district that would love to do this, that are towns of under 1,000 people, but an illustration of a town 1,000 or fewer who would want to build housing for 10 to 15. and how that water sewer could work. I think we need a real example of how a town of that size might be able to benefit and manage it. Most importantly, that we know how they benefit. How would they manage the entire process with you?
I think it's safe to say we will revisit this
Yes,
issue in
this is
more
just the
detail
beginning.
with you or with Joan and Jessica as appropriate.
Yeah, but thank you. I think this is an exciting idea and one we've explored for a long time and haven't been able to get over the finish line. So I'm hoping this can do it.
Leonora?
Yeah, and I just want to, as a Essex person in Chittenden County, I just want to echo. It's so important for us to really clarify as, Rep,
Persons.
Rep Joe. As Rep President's illustrated, we don't want to set up a competition for limited resources that's just going to keep reinforcing this notion that some people are always out to benefit. So,
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Alec.
All right, thank you. All right, so I'm going to turn now to some of the investments. Now, I just want to make a point that with these investments to VHFA, this is somewhat of a bridge between the infrastructure conversation and then housing investment conversation. Not to say that these investments would largely go to sort of broad infrastructure, but when there's project specific investments that need to be made, say you need to run a line into a field or whatever it is as a part of a housing project, these investments can certainly play that role. These have been very successful programs. So people likely heard in the governor's budget address, $30 million headed to the Vermont Housing Finance Agency to support two programs that I know both of these committees are familiar with and both have been very supportive of. The first being $15 million to the Middle Income Homeownership Development Program. The second being $15 million to the Rental Revolving Loan Fund, both of those targeting middle income folks. So going down to 65% AMI or even lower if appropriate, but also serving folks, either home buyers or renters, depending on the program. The names say it all, up to 150% of the area median income. Do you have any questions on these programs? And I'm sure Maura would be happy to come in and talk more.
Oh, she's on.
Thank you.
Can you just remind us, as we look at the middle income homeownership project, which we have invested in, I think we began in OMAD.
That's right.
So how many homes we actually built?
That would be a Maura question. I don't have that data at my fingertips.
Because it's fewer, but it's had a big impact on that particular.
It has, and in both of these programs, especially the RRLF, the cost per unit was very impressive.
Yes, well, this buys down the gap between the assessment and the actual cost.
Exactly.
So for new people,
it's making homeownership more attainable.
I know it's incredibly valuable in this market in particular.
Alex, what I heard you saying is that these funds, the 30 million, in each case, some of it could be used for project-related infrastructure as well.
It could be.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Any other questions, team?
If he's up for it, I'm going to pass it to Deputy Commissioner Formulari to talk about these next couple of slides.
Sure, yeah.
Probably both be up there. There's another chair.
I'm actually going to take a moment to grab my tea that I left out here.
There we are.
Hello, folks. For the record, I'm Nate Formulari, the Deputy Commissioner for the Department of Housing and Community Development. So for this, you've heard now about some kind of bigger things that are brewing in the bill and the plan. So this section, we just wanted to talk about all the different ways we're looking at trying to solve this housing shortage. So some of those involve smaller programs. I'll start with Homes for All. You may have heard this was mentioned in the governor's budget. This actually isn't a financial act beyond some staffing resources, but this is a program that is gone through a first phase and created a toolkit that has designs for missing middle homes. So To clarify, missing middle income programs to build housing. In the planning community, missing middle homes is a category of home in densely populated areas as older housing stock comes offline. How do we, do gentle infill where a big Victorian maybe becomes a three apartment building as well? So we can have folks in to talk about this program specifically and walk you through that toolkit. But the idea is to keep that moving. So we have this toolkit. Great. To your point, how are local towns and people going to access this? So the next phase of this is to set up a cohort of trainers and teachers to help people that want to get into home building, small scale home building that can help them get there. And then with that, help towns. How can towns adopt zoning and bylaws that allow for these specific designs to just plug and play? So when someone wants to do an infill project, it reduces the process and it's allowing different types of developers to get involved. So that's what that program is, and that's what the infill technical assistance is about. We're excited that there's a lot of energy in the community for this. We held a conference on it and hundreds of people showed up. So it's something we definitely want to see keep going.
Quick question. We had in here, does this effort include that rather heavy document?
Yes. That's the toolkit. Yeah.
That's the toolkit for.
Yes.
The second one is the idea here in terms of the designs to produce a literal standard design for, let's say, a fourplex with the idea that a town might adopt a zoning ordinance would make that it made it easier to approve as of right?
That's absolutely right. Yeah.
And we also, that is envisioned as a later phase, and we have Chris Cochran on Zoom if he wants to chime in to add any further context to that.
We can have Chris in.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that that's out there.
Yep.
So we have this rolled out in part for VHIP through our home ownership partners. I mean, our home, I never remember what we called it.
Home ownership centers.
Our home ownership
Yeah.
centers. So we already have this in part. Are you, and it's inconsistent, I would say, but it is envisioned, I mean, it has rolled out in technical assistance and support for VHIP for all our.
Yeah, well, this is different than, sorry.
It's a little different.
Yeah.
Are we incorporating? It makes no sense to do one without the other, quite frankly. So are we, I assume we're incorporating VHIP in this as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of it's why we group them together, because all these things need to work together to grow.
Oh, I'm not sure I see them grouped together.
Just in this slide, I mean, that's why we're putting this all together in the presentation this way, because this is about growing small scale developers. So I think the difference in VHIP is that is a separate program.
But it needs the same technical assistance. And so even if you own a home and you aren't going to become a developer, but you may develop your home with an ADU, you still need assistance.
Yes, correct.
And so I assume this technical assistance will apply for all of this development, for VHIP and.
If somebody is applying for a VHIP grant and wanted to seek technical assistance, absolutely. There's no restriction preventing.
Yeah, okay, great. It's just anybody who wants to undertake a project could access this. Okay, great. That's what I'm trying to clarify.
Is there any other change to VHIP in your proposal other than the funding?
Well, no, I mean, in the bill, you'll see it's just, establishing the program as a permanent program rather than base funding, but
It's base funding.
I'll add a small caveat that there was a drafting error last year that's corrected in this bill.
Okay,
technical correction. But the program itself will not be changed.
thank you. Is it still the cap, not 70, but 50 and 20?
30 or 50, depending on room count, and then up to 70 now for certain accessibility modifications.
Right, so there's 20 called, that's still in there.
Yeah, we're not changing that.
Okay, great, thank you.
cover the next slide too, or?
You like.
So moving on, these are some other, tools that are working that we want to continue to invest in. So MER is the Mobile Home Improvement and Repair Program. And that has helped 700 projects in 132 different manufactured home communities around the state. It's anything from full foundation and repair to helping people with leaky roofs, leaky windows to get their homes livable again. So a very important program in that it's keeping people housed currently. And as we see more infill in parks, this can also work with healthy homes through A&R because these parks are also looking to upgrade septic and water and get them modernized. So this program works very well as a stackable option sometimes for parks. Brownfields, looking to invest $2 million there. Folks might be familiar with this, but these are contaminated sites. This money goes to help clean them up, and then they're redeveloped. Bring housing online, yeah.
Field. We've heard anecdotally quite a bit about brownfield, the brownfield process being time-consuming, difficult, pain.
Expensive.
And expensive. Is there anything in this proposal that addresses that issue directly?
Not envisioned in this bill.
Okay, great.
I will note, this is a very modest amount of money for a piece that is so vital to our green lighting, a lot of housing in our downtowns and village centers.
Very fair, very fair.
I think that I would be hoping we would be tripling this amount and really helping get more land back online. And I guess while we're on cleanup land, I don't see, and maybe you address it later, the remediation, the soil remediation possibility of reviewing that.
So that's not contemplated in this bill, but we do, so folks.
Because I know that's a huge issue.
And the folks at A&R have been talking to, I think, members of your committee about language around that. So that.
They will
may
be,
be
yeah.
a separate vehicle.
Okay, great. Thanks.
And then the downtown and village center tax credits, a very successful program that has been funded at 3 million for years. During the days of ARPA, we got some one-time funds to bring that up to 5 million. It was still oversubscribed. It's gone back down to 3, and we're still getting around $5 million of applications in every year. So we just want to shore that up and meet that demand. And I would just, one note on that program is it leverages an incredible amount of
17 to 1 at
Yeah.
least.
Yeah.
And it is one of our most successful. When you look at the bang for the buck, this is one of the greatest programs on the face of the planet. And we just have to mention Paul Brune at this moment.
Yes, yes.
And hold him up, or wherever you are.
All the above there.
And Chris Cochran, who's happily still with us.
And Caitlin Corkins, who runs it.
Caitlin Corkins runs that.
Right.
Yes. I'm going to turn it back to the commissioner.
Commissioner, at some point in the next 5 or 10 minutes, we should take a break, and I'm gonna leave it to you. to Think when that is.
This may be a good stopping point.
All right. Why
It's
don't
very
we
moment
take- why don't
before we hit
take-
appeals.
Okay, let's take a break.
Unless you'd like to do appeals first. We're about to turn to the regulatory side.
Yeah, all right. I think we should then take a break.
How about
Let's not make it a very long break. Could I ask that we be reassembled here? It's now 2 minutes up according to that clock that you passed.